Daniel Reed pressed his forehead against the cold window of the transport ship and watched the Galactic Archive station grow larger in the darkness. The structure looked like a massive silver tube floating in space, surrounded by smaller ships that moved like fireflies around a lamp. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the handle of his worn travel bag. Inside were 12 books from Earth, stories he had loved since childhood. Everything else he owned had been left behind on a planet that now felt impossibly far away. The docking process took 20 minutes. When the airlock finally opened, Daniel stepped into a corridor filled with creatures he had only seen in training videos. A tall being with blue skin and 4 arms walked past without looking at him. Something that resembled a floating jellyfish drifted overhead, its translucent body pulsing with purple light. Daniel swallowed hard and followed the signs written in 12 different languages, including English. His supervisor waited in the main archive hall. Chiddle was an insectoid, roughly Daniel's height, but with a body covered in dark green plates that clicked softly when she moved. Her large compound eyes reflected the light in strange patterns. She extended one of her 4 thin arms in what Daniel recognized as a formal greeting. "You are the human librarian," Chiddle said. Her voice came through a translation device attached to her thorax. "We have never had one of your kind here before." "I hope that's a good thing," Daniel replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Chiddle made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "Your species has a reputation. You see patterns where others see chaos. You remember stories when others remember only facts. This is why we accepted your application." She led him through corridors lined with data crystals that glowed in soft colors. The archive was enormous, spanning multiple levels that curved with the station's circular design. Daniel saw storage rooms filled with physical books, digital archives projected as holograms, and even what looked like living plants that somehow contained information in their leaves. "The collection represents 47 species," Chiddle explained. "Some materials are millions of years old. Your duties will focus on the human section, but you may explore others during your free time." They passed a sealed door marked with symbols Daniel couldn't read. From behind it came a sound that made his spine stiffen. It was somewhere between a roar and a scream, high-pitched and furious. "What's in there?" Daniel asked. Chiddle's antennae flattened against her head. "The hatchery archives. It is restricted. You will not go there." "Why not?" "Because dragon hatchlings are kept there while their parents serve in the Imperial Guard. They are dangerous, even as children. 3 caretakers have been injured in the past month trying to manage them." Daniel stopped walking. "Dragons are real, very real," Chiddle said, "and very deadly. Their species controls 3 star systems and serves as elite warriors across the galaxy. But their young are difficult, aggressive. No species has successfully bonded with them. The automated systems barely keep them contained." Another roar echoed through the walls. Daniel felt it in his chest like a drumbeat. "The parents are currently deployed fighting pirate raiders," Chiddle continued. "The hatchlings were brought here because it was deemed safer than leaving them on their home world. That assessment is now being questioned." She led Daniel to his quarters, a small room with a sleeping pod, a desk, and a window that looked out at the gas giant the station orbited. The planet was massive and orange, with storms swirling across its surface that could swallow Earth whole. "Your orientation begins tomorrow," Chiddle said. "Rest tonight. The archive operates on a 26-hour cycle. You will adjust." After she left, Daniel unpacked his books and arranged them on the desk. Their worn covers and creased spines looked out of place among all the advanced technology surrounding him. He picked up one book, a collection of fairy tales his mother had read to him when he was young. The pages were yellow with age and smelled like home. Another roar came from somewhere in the station. Daniel moved to the window and stared at the gas giant. He thought about the hatchlings locked away in the restricted section, scared and angry and alone. He knew that feeling. When his parents had died 5 years ago, he'd spent months feeling exactly like that. The only thing that had helped was losing himself in stories, in worlds where problems could be solved and heroes always found a way through. He set the book down and climbed into the sleeping pod. The material adjusted to his body, more comfortable than anything he had ever felt on Earth. But despite the comfort, sleep came slowly. Every time he started to drift off, he heard the distant sound of dragon hatchlings crying out in the darkness, and he wondered if anyone ever tried just talking to them. 3 weeks at the archive had given Daniel a comfortable routine. He spent his mornings cataloging human literature that other species had collected over the years, often finding books he had never heard of mixed with classics he knew by heart. The afternoons were devoted to helping other archivists understand human storytelling patterns, explaining why certain myths appeared across different cultures or how narrative structure affected meaning. But today, the routine shattered. Daniel was reorganizing a shelf of poetry when the roaring started. It was louder than usual, multiple voices screaming at once. The sound made the data crystals around him vibrate. Other archivists looked up from their work with worried expressions. Chiddle rushed past his station without her usual measured pace. "What's happening?" Daniel called after her. "The hatchlings are fighting again. The automated systems have failed. Stay here." But Daniel didn't stay. He followed the sounds through corridors he had been told to avoid, past warning signs in languages he was still learning to read. The sealed door to the hatchery archive stood open, and through it he could see Chaos Point 5 dragon hatchlings, each roughly the size of a Great Dane, were tearing into each other in the center of a large circular room. Their scales flashed different colors as they moved: bronze, silver, deep green, midnight blue, and rust red. Claws scraped against the metal floor. Tails whipped through the air. One hatchling bit down on another's wing, and the screaming intensified. Station security stood outside the entrance, clearly unwilling to enter. Daniel understood why. Even as babies, these creatures were terrifying. Their teeth were already sharp enough to tear metal. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence and rage. But Daniel noticed something the security team seemed to miss. The hatchlings weren't trying to kill each other. Their bites were restrained. Their claws were sheathed. They were fighting because they were scared and frustrated and had no other way to express what they felt. He had seen this before, in his own way. After the accident that killed his parents, Daniel had spent months picking fights with anyone who looked at him wrong. The anger had felt better than the grief, until a teacher had sat him down and just listened. Without thinking about the danger, Daniel walked through the entrance and sat down on the floor about 10 feet from the fighting hatchlings. He pulled his shoulder bag around and took out the fairy tale book he always carried. His hand shook as he opened to the first story, but his voice came out steady and clear. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a prince who had lost his way home. The effect wasn't immediate. The hatchlings continued fighting for another minute. But then the bronze one, the largest of the group, turned its head toward Daniel. Its eyes were golden and remarkably intelligent. It stopped mid-strike and simply stared. Daniel kept reading. The prince wandered through dark forests and across empty plains. He was alone and afraid, but he kept walking because he knew someone somewhere was looking for him. The silver hatchling stopped next, followed by the green one. They pulled away from each other and turned their attention to the strange creature sitting calmly in their space, making sound they had never heard before. One day, the prince met a companion who had also lost their way. Together, they traveled through dangers that would have destroyed them alone. They learned that being lost was less frightening when you had someone beside you. Daniel's voice settled into a rhythm. He had read these stories hundreds of times and knew them almost by memory. The words flowed naturally, rising and falling like music. The hatchlings moved closer, slowly, cautiously. The blue one tilted its head like a curious dog. The red one sat down and wrapped its tail around its feet. By the time Daniel reached the end of the first chapter, all 5 hatchlings had arranged themselves in a semicircle around him. They sat completely still, their glowing eyes fixed on his face. The room was silent except for his voice and the soft sound of their breathing. Daniel closed the book carefully and looked at each hatchling in turn. "That's all for today. Maybe tomorrow I'll read more, if you want." The bronze hatchling made a sound deep in its throat, something between a purr and a rumble. It wasn't aggressive. It sounded almost like disappointment. Daniel stood slowly, keeping his movements gentle and predictable. None of the hatchlings moved to attack. He walked backward to the entrance, maintaining eye contact with the bronze one until he stepped through the doorway. The security team stared at him like he had just performed a miracle. Chiddle appeared moments later, her antennae quivering with what Daniel now recognized as shock. "How did you do that?" she asked. Daniel shrugged, still trying to process what had just happened. "I just read them a story. Sometimes that's all anyone needs." Behind him, through the open door, he could hear the hatchlings settling down. There was no more fighting, just the quiet sounds of 5 young creatures finding peace for the first time in weeks. Gresh was an amphibian from a water world 3 systems away, and his office reflected that heritage. Moisture hung in the air like invisible fog. The walls displayed projections of oceans with waves that moved in slow motion. When he spoke, his wide mouth barely moved, but his voice came through clear and measured. "Mr. Reed, I called you here because I have reviewed the security footage from yesterday's incident in the hatchery archives." Daniel sat in a chair that adjusted to his body temperature. He had spent the night expecting to be reprimanded, possibly sent back to Earth in disgrace. Going into a restricted area was serious. Risking his life with dangerous creatures was probably worse. "I understand I broke protocol," Daniel said, "but I heard them screaming and I just thought." Gresh raised one web hand. "You thought correctly. In the 16 days since those hatchlings arrived, we have had 4 serious incidents. 2 caretakers were hospitalized. The automated containment systems have been damaged 3 times. Station Command was considering relocating them to a military facility, which would have been traumatic for creatures so young." He tapped a control pad, and the wall behind him displayed frozen images from a security feed. Daniel saw himself sitting on the floor, surrounded by attentive hatchlings. "Then you entered their space and accomplished in 30 minutes what teams of specialists could not accomplish in weeks. You calmed them completely. Do you understand the significance of this?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Dragon hatchlings are notoriously difficult," Gresh explained. "Their species evolved as apex predators. They are intelligent, proud, and aggressive by nature. Most dragons raise their young in isolation, away from other species. These 5 were only brought here because their parents are part of an elite combat unit currently deployed in the Outer Territories fighting organized pirate raiders. The mission is expected to last another 4 months." For months, Daniel thought about those creatures locked in that room for 4 more months with no one who understood them. "I have a proposal," Gresh continued. "In addition to your regular archive duties, I would like you to spend time with the hatchlings each day. Read to them. Keep them calm. Whatever method you used yesterday, continue it." "I just read them a story," Daniel said. "Nothing special. For them, it was very special. Dragons have exceptional hearing. Perhaps the rhythm of your voice affects them in ways we do not understand. Perhaps it is something else entirely. Whatever the reason, you have achieved results. Will you accept this assignment?" Daniel thought about the bronze hatchling's golden eyes, the way all 5 of them had listened so intently. "Yes, I'll do it." That evening, Daniel returned to the hatchery archives with 4 books in his bag. The room had been cleaned since yesterday, the scratches on the floor polished away. The hatchlings were separated in different corners, clearly unhappy about being apart. The moment Daniel stepped through the entrance, 5 heads turned toward him in unison. The bronze one, the first to notice him yesterday, stood immediately. It made that rumbling sound again, deeper this time, and moved forward. Daniel sat in the same spot as before and pulled out a different book. "Hello again. I brought new stories today." The bronze hatchling sat directly in front of him, closer than yesterday. The others followed, forming their semicircle. Daniel noticed details he had missed during the chaos of their first meeting. The silver hatchling had a small scar above its left eye. The green one's scales shimmered like emeralds when the light hit them right. The blue hatchling was the smallest, but had the most alert expression. The red one had wings that were slightly larger than the others. He began reading a story about ancient heroes who fought impossible battles and won through courage rather than strength. The hatchlings listened with the same intense focus as before. When Daniel reached an exciting part where the hero faced a terrible monster, The blue hatchling leaned forward. When the hero showed mercy to a fallen enemy, the bronze one made a soft chirping sound. They understood. Maybe not every word, but they understood the meaning behind the words. They recognized bravery and kindness and sacrifice. Daniel read for 2 hours that first evening. When his voice grew tired, he closed the book and promised to return tomorrow. The hatchlings didn't fight when he left. They simply watched him go, then settled down to sleep in a group, their bodies pressed together for warmth and comfort. The pattern continued for 3 weeks. Every evening after his archive work, Daniel visited the hatchery archives. He read legends, fables, adventure stories, and myths from different Earth cultures. The hatchlings developed preferences. The bronze one always positioned itself closest to Daniel. The silver one seemed to enjoy stories about warriors. The green hatchling preferred tales with clever solutions to problems. The blue one liked mysteries. The red one loved anything with flying. Daniel learned their body language. When their tails swished quickly, they were excited. When their ears flattened, they were uncertain. When they made that rumbling sound, they were content. They began to anticipate his arrival, gathering at the entrance minutes before he appeared. Other species on the station started paying attention. Daniel would find aliens he had never met watching him in the corridors, their expressions mixtures of curiosity and disbelief. Chiddle told him that word had spread beyond the station. The human who tamed dragon hatchlings with nothing but his voice was becoming famous, but Daniel didn't feel famous. He felt needed, and for the first time since leaving Earth, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The discovery in Section 14 had everyone working overtime. A salvage crew had recovered an archive from a civilization that went extinct 2,000 years ago, and the data needed to be processed before degradation set in. Daniel had been cataloging for 16 hours straight, his eyes burning from staring at holographic displays that showed text and languages that predated human writing. Chiddle had offered to let him skip the evening reading, but Daniel refused. The hatchlings expected him. Breaking that promise felt worse than pushing through exhaustion. So when the station's clock showed evening cycle, he grabbed his bag and headed to the hatchery archives on autopilot, his mind fuzzy with tiredness. The hatchlings greeted him with their usual enthusiasm. The bronze one, which Daniel had mentally nicknamed Scholar because of its intense focus during readings, chirped and pressed its snout against his hand. The touch was warm and surprisingly gentle for a creature with such deadly potential. "Hey, everyone," Daniel said, his voice already rough from talking to Chiddle all day. "Sorry I'm late. Long day." He sat in his usual spot and pulled out a thick book of epic tales. This one was about ancient warriors who defended their homeland against impossible odds. The story was long and complex, with multiple characters and layered plot lines. Daniel had been reading it to them over the past week, and they seemed captivated by the scope of it. He opened to the marked page and began reading. His voice came out steady at first, falling into the familiar rhythm. The hatchlings settled into their positions. Scholar sat closest as always, with the others arranged around Daniel in their protective semicircle. The warrior stood on the battlefield and raised his sword to the sky. He knew this might be his last fight, but he also knew he could not run. Too many people depended on him. Too many lives rested on what happened in the next few hours. Daniel's eyelids grew heavy. He blinked hard and forced them open, continuing the story. The hatchlings watched him with their glowing eyes, completely absorbed in the tale. His companions gathered around him, each carrying their own weapons, each bearing their own scars from previous battles. Together, they had survived what no one else could survive. Together, they would face whatever came next. The words started to blur together. Daniel's head nodded forward, and he jerked it back up, trying to focus on the page. His body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. They charged forward into the darkness, not knowing if they would see another dawn, but knowing that some things were worth fighting for. Worth. His voice trailed off. The book slipped slightly in his hands. Daniel's eyes closed, and this time they didn't open. His head tilted back against the wall, and within seconds he was deeply asleep, the exhaustion of 16 hours of intense work finally claiming him. The book remained open in his lap, the story unfinished. The The hatchlings noticed immediately. Scholar leaned forward and sniffed Daniel carefully, its nostrils flaring. It made a questioning sound, somewhere between a whine and a chirp. When Daniel didn't respond, Scholar looked back at the others. For a moment, the 5 hatchlings simply stared at the sleeping human. They had never seen him vulnerable like this. In their experience, most species saw them as threats and kept distance even during peaceful moments. But this strange creature had sat with them every day for weeks, completely unguarded, trusting them not to hurt him. Scholar moved first. The bronze hatchling carefully positioned itself against Daniel's left side, pressing its warm body along his ribs. It rested its head on Daniel's thigh, being cautious not to put too much weight on him. The position was protective, shielding Daniel from the room while keeping him warm. The silver hatchling, who Daniel had started thinking of as Sentinel because of its alert nature, moved to Daniel's right side and mirrored Scholar's position. Together, they formed a living barrier around the human. The green hatchling, Sage, curled up at Daniel's feet. The blue one, Swift, tucked itself behind Daniel's back, providing support so he wouldn't slump over. The red hatchling, Sky, completed the circle by positioning itself in front, facing outward, its wings partially spread. Within minutes, all 5 hatchlings had arranged themselves into a protective formation around Daniel. Their body heat created a warm cocoon. Their breathing synchronized, slow, and steady. They were guarding him the same way young dragons would guard their own family members in the wild. The station's environmental sensors detected the unusual heat signature in the hatchery archives and sent an automatic alert to security. 2 guards rushed to investigate, expecting equipment failure or possibly a fire. They found something impossible instead. Daniel Reed, the human librarian, sleeping peacefully while surrounded by 5 dragon hatchlings who formed a living shield around him. The creature's eyes tracked the guards' movements, but they made no aggressive gestures. They simply watched, making it clear that no one would reach the human without going through them first. One guard immediately contacted Gresh. The station commander arrived within minutes, accompanied by Chiddle and 3 other senior staff members. They stood at the entrance to the hatchery archives and stared at the scene in silence. "This is not possible," Chiddle whispered. "Dragon hatchlings do not show protective behavior toward other species. This is family bonding behavior. They have claimed him." Gresh's expression was unreadable. "Do not wake them. Do not interfere. Station security, maintain position outside this room, but do not enter. If those hatchlings have chosen to protect him, we will not disrespect that choice. But the human needs rest in proper quarters," one staffer protested. "He is resting," Gresh replied, "and he is safer in that room than anywhere else on this station." The alert reached the Imperial Guard's combat carrier 4 hours after Daniel fell asleep. The encrypted message was brief and urgent. Situation at the Galactic Archive Station involving their hatchlings required immediate return. No details about injuries or deaths, which meant the situation was either very bad or very strange. Commander Ash made the decision in seconds. Her unit had been hunting pirate raiders for 6 weeks, and they were close to cornering the last of them. But nothing mattered more than their young. She ordered the carrier to break off pursuit and jump to the station's coordinates at maximum speed. The 5 adult dragons barely fit in the carrier's combat bay. Each stood over 20 feet tall, with wingspans that would have scraped the ceiling if extended. Their scales bore the marks of countless battles, scars, burns, missing pieces that had regrown darker than the original. They were warriors in every sense, bred and trained for violence from the moment they hatched. Ash herself was the largest and most scarred. A plasma weapon had melted scales across her left shoulder years ago, leaving twisted metal-like patterns. Her eyes were the same golden color as Scholar's, but harder, colder. She had lived for 93 years and spent 70 of them fighting. The jump took 3 hours. During that time, none of the dragons spoke. They checked their weapons, sharpened their claws, and waited with the patience of predators who knew that rushing into unknown situations got people killed. When they docked with the archive station, Ash noticed the nervous energy of the station's security immediately. The guards moved aside quickly as 5 massive dragons squeezed through corridors designed for smaller species. Warning lights flashed. Civilians pressed themselves against walls and stared with expressions mixing fear and awe. Gresh met them outside the hatchery archives. The small amphibian looked even smaller, standing before creatures that could swallow him whole. "Commander Ash," he said, his voice remarkably steady, "your hatchlings are unharmed, but the situation is unusual and requires careful. Where are they?" Ash's voice came out as a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. "Inside. But please, you must understand before you enter." Ash pushed past him. The other 4 dragons followed, their claws scraping against the metal floor. They had expected chaos or blood or frightened hatchlings cowering in corners. What they found stopped them completely in the center of the room. Their 5 hatchlings were arranged in a perfect defensive circle around a sleeping human. The stranger was small compared to dragons, maybe 6 feet tall, with dark hair and clothes marked with what looked like symbols from his culture. He sat slumped against the wall with his head tilted back, mouth slightly open, completely vulnerable. Scholar was pressed against the human's left side with its head resting on the human's leg. Sentinel mirrored the position on the right. Sage curled at his feet. Swift supported his back. Sky faced outward with wings spread in a clearly protective stance. All 5 hatchlings looked up at their parents with expressions Ash had never seen before. It wasn't fear or relief or excitement. It was possessiveness. They were guarding this human the way young dragons guarded their clutchmates, their siblings, their family. "What magic is this?" demanded Forge, the male dragon whose scales were rust-red like skies. "What has this creature done to our young?" "No magic," Gresh said from the entrance. "Only stories. The human reads to them. They have bonded." Ash moved closer, her massive head lowering to inspect the scene. Scholar made a warning sound deep in its throat, not aggressive but firm. It was telling its own parent to keep distance from the human. "You challenge me, little one?" Ash asked softly. Scholar didn't back down. It maintained its protective position, and the other hatchlings did the same. Ash felt something unexpected, pride. Her hatchling had found something worth protecting. That was the first lesson any dragon learned, that some things mattered more than your own safety. She had expected to teach Scholar that lesson herself over many years. Instead, this human had somehow taught it in weeks. "Tell me everything," Ash said to Gresh without looking away from her hatchling. The station commander explained the situation. The fighting, the injuries to caretakers, Daniel's spontaneous decision to read to them, the daily sessions that had continued for weeks, the transformation from aggressive isolation to peaceful contentment. He fell asleep reading to them tonight. Gresh finished. They arranged themselves into this formation to protect him. The behavior is identical to what dragon clutches do in the wild when guarding vulnerable family members. Ash settled onto her haunches, making herself smaller and less threatening. The other adult dragons followed her lead, forming a wider circle around the group in the center. "What is this human's name?" Ash asked. "Daniel Reed. He is a librarian from Earth, here on cultural exchange." "Daniel," Ash repeated, testing the foreign sounds. She switched to the ancient dragon language and spoke to her hatchling. "You have chosen him?" Scholar responded with a series of chirps and rumbles that translated roughly to, "He comes every day. He shares stories. He is not afraid of us. He treats us like we matter." "Do the others agree?" The 4 other hatchlings made affirmative sounds, their voices blending into a chorus of acceptance. Ash looked at her fellow warriors. They had fought together for decades, trusted each other with their lives. She saw understanding in their eyes. They knew what this meant. "Then we will honor this choice," Ash said. "The human has done what no warrior could. He has earned the trust of Dragon Young without force or dominance. He has shown them kindness when others showed fear." Daniel began to stir. His eyes fluttered open slowly, confused by the warmth surrounding him. He looked down and saw Scholar's head on his lap, then gradually registered the other hatchlings pressed against him. His gaze lifted, and he found himself staring directly at 5 adult dragons who could kill him with a single strike. To his credit, he didn't scream. His eyes went wide, and his breathing quickened, but he held himself still. "Hello," he said quietly. "I am sorry. I didn't mean to fall asleep." Ash watched the human's reaction carefully. She had seen many species respond to dragons over her long life. Most showed terror. Some showed aggression born from fear. A few showed respect, mixed with caution. But this human's first instinct, even surrounded by creatures that could end him instantly, was to apologize for falling asleep. "You are Daniel Reed," Ash said. Her translator converted the dragon speech into words Daniel could understand. "You have been reading to our hatchlings." Daniel swallowed hard, but maintained eye contact. Scholar shifted against him, making a reassuring rumble. The young dragon's confidence in the human seemed to calm him slightly. "Yes, I read to them every evening. Stories from Earth. They seem to enjoy it. Enjoy it." Forge moved forward, his massive form casting shadows across the room. "You have done far more than provide enjoyment. You have bonded with them. Do you understand what this means?" Daniel shook his head slowly. Scholar pressed closer to him, clearly protective. Ash made a decision. She lowered herself completely flat against the floor, bringing her enormous head down to Daniel's eye level. It was a position of equality, used only between dragons who trusted each other completely. The other adult dragons made surprise sounds, but followed her lead. "In our culture," Ash began, "hatchlings choose those they will protect. It is instinctive, something we cannot teach or force. They recognize beings who are worthy of absolute loyalty. This is sacred to us. Our young have chosen you." "I don't understand," Daniel said. "I just read them stories." "You gave them something they needed more than food or safety," Ash replied. "You gave them connection. You treated them as individuals worthy of your time and attention. You showed them that different species can exist together without violence. These lessons are more valuable than any combat training we could provide." Daniel looked at each hatchling in turn. They gazed back at him with obvious affection, their earlier protective stance relaxing now that their parents had shown acceptance rather than aggression. "On my world," Daniel said slowly, "we have a saying. The strongest warrior is not the one who wins every fight. It is the one who knows when fighting is unnecessary." Ash's eyes glowed brighter. "Your world has wisdom. What magic did you use to calm them?" "No magic, just stories. On Earth, that is how we connect with each other, especially with the young. We tell them about heroes and challenges and how problems can be solved. We show them that they are not alone in whatever they feel." "Stories," Ash repeated. She looked at Scholar, her hatchling, and saw contentment she had never expected to see so soon. "You have given them something we could not. We are warriors. We teach survival and strength. But you taught them about connection." Gresh stepped into the room carefully. "Commander Ash, Mr. Reed has been reading to the hatchlings for several weeks. They have transformed under his care. There have been no fights, no injuries, no incidents. I would like to request that he continue this work until the hatchlings are ready to leave with you." "How long?" Ash asked. "At least 3 more months. Perhaps 4. Ash considered this. Her unit's deployment had another 14 weeks minimum. Leaving the hatchlings here had seemed like the safest option, but it had not accounted for how difficult isolation would be for young dragons. This human had solved a problem she had not known how to address. "Daniel Reed," she said formally, "I would ask something of you. Continue reading to our young. Guide them. Give them a connection they need until we can return permanently. In exchange, I will grant you a dragon name in our language." Daniel blinked. "A dragon name? It translates to your language as Keeper of Tales. It is a title of respect. It means you hold something precious and protect it with wisdom rather than force." "I don't need a title," Daniel said. "I will keep reading to them because they deserve it. Because everyone deserves to have someone who shows up for them." Ash made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You truly do not understand how rare you are, human. Most species fear us. You sit with our young and fall asleep surrounded by them, trusting them completely. That trust is worth more than any weapon." Scholar chirped and nuzzled Daniel's hand. The other hatchlings made similar sounds of agreement, their tails swishing with happiness. Over the following months, Daniel continued his evening readings. The adult dragons returned to their deployment, but they sent messages frequently, always asking about the hatchlings. Daniel learned more about dragon culture, about their history and values. He discovered that they prized honor and loyalty above all else, and that they viewed their children as their greatest treasure. The hatchlings grew rapidly. Scholar became even larger, its bronze scales gleaming with health. The others thrived equally well. They learned to control their strength, to think before reacting, to value connection over dominance. All lessons that came naturally from the stories Daniel shared. Word spread throughout the galaxy about the human librarian who had bonded with dragon hatchlings. Other species began sending their troubled young to the archive station, asking if Daniel would read to them as well. He found himself surrounded by children from a dozen different worlds, all listening intently as he shared Earth stories. When the dragons finally returned permanently, Scholar was nearly twice the size it had been. The young dragon had grown confident and calm, its aggressive tendencies channeled into protective instincts. The moment Scholar saw Daniel, it bounded across the docking bay and pressed its head against him with enough force to nearly knock him over. Ash watched with obvious satisfaction. "You have done well, Keeper of Tales. Our young are not just healthy. They are wise beyond their years." Daniel scratched behind Scholar's ear ridge, something he had learned the dragon enjoyed. "They taught me as much as I taught them. Maybe more. Will you continue this work?" Ash asked. "I think I have to," Daniel replied, looking at the young creatures from various species who had gathered to hear his evening reading. Turns out there are a lot of beings in this galaxy who just need someone to tell them a story and remind them they matter. Scholar nuzzled him again, then settled beside him the same way it had that first night, forming a protective circle. The other hatchlings joined, along with younglings from other species who had learned to trust the human with a gentle voice and endless patience. And as Daniel opened his book to begin another story, Ash understood something profound. Strength came in many forms, and sometimes the greatest warriors were those who never raised a weapon at all.